Hi friends, I'm Pastor Terry Lee. We are Dalhousie Church, and this is the 10-Minute Coach. Welcome to the 10-Minute Coach. So glad to be a part of the church family at Dalhousie, and this is a tool that I have used for a number of years, hoping to help people take a step beyond the message on Sunday into the text, that as James describes it, that we would be both hearers of the word, but then also doers of the word by going back to the biblical text that we were in, going back to perhaps some of the ideas that we discussed together on Sunday, and back to what God was saying to us. So maybe just a couple of setup comments related to that. I've been inviting our small group leaders to use these tools as a way to consolidate what we're learning together as followers of Jesus. There's always more to learn. Most of us don't struggle with enough information. We struggle with enough application. And so this is an invitation to help your small group come back to this. Some of you will have people who will say, well, but I missed the sermon. Is that a problem? And it's not a problem, because by and large, we're text-based. So if somebody comes back and just reads the biblical passage, they're fully capable of entering into the conversation of your small group conversation. If you're doing this as a family around the dinner table, and somebody was not present at the sermon, it can be really actually a wonderful experience to invite one another to explain what was said, because sometimes it helps people come back into it. And then there's this piece I didn't understand. And I think that is where, as small group leaders, this can be particularly valuable, because inevitably there's something that even the most mature follower of Jesus didn't quite get. Or then wonderfully, that new believer or that yet to believe person gets an opportunity alongside the others in your group to go back and say, well, what was that thing about? Or why did the pastor say this or the preacher say that? And so that's a little bit of a setup type of thing. 10-Minute Coach is intended to just be a little leg up for anybody who wants to use this tool. It'll be made available to anyone and everyone, but particularly for you as small group leaders, I have you in mind, hoping that maybe this would be a little bit of coaching that would help you take the sermon notes. So perhaps you take notes through the Sunday morning message, or you go back to the video recording of the message if you missed Sunday morning and listen to the message, the sermon part of it. It'll be roughly 35 minutes long. But then on the back of the sermon notes, or I'm going to send you a PDF that has it printed like this, on the back of the sermon notes that are handed out on Sunday are a series of questions that I call sermon-based questions for further reflection. And this is where I'm envisioning you in a small group environment, having a conversation together with your people. My hope is that I will help you take a step further beyond what we were able to discuss on a Sunday morning within the confines of a 30 or 35-minute sermon, sometimes 40, and go a little bit deeper into discussion. Well, what about this? What about that? Now, that is going to be super easy. In fact, in this current series, in fact, you're going to have difficulty kind of deciding which direction you want the conversation to go. And I would encourage you just kind of listen to your group. What in particular are they interested in? So this is a series that I've done before, but never the way that I'm doing it here for Dalhousie Church. It's a series that is I'm calling it The Big Picture, the story of God among us. And it's an attempt to go from Genesis through Revelation, and it's going to be a multi-month journey where September through end of November, we will do Genesis through to the beginning of the prophets. Through the season of Advent, we will do the prophets and how they anticipated the coming of Jesus. And then in the new year, we will start in Matthew, and we will cover through the book of Revelation, looking at the Gospels, looking at the epistles. Palm Sunday, I expect that we will conclude the series in the book of Revelation. Then Easter Sunday, we will start a new series that will take us into the fall. More about that later. Or into the spring, that'll take us through the end of June. Related to this topic, there are so many places that we could have gone, and I want to just acknowledge that up front, because the reality is that we have a bunch
we're covering an enormous portion of Scripture together. Now, in this case, you could say we're covering Genesis 1 through 11, which is often referred to as the prehistory portions of Scripture. There are, in Genesis 1, 2, and 3 alone, there are reams of material that have been written on that. And the obvious place that we would go would be to the creation narrative. And I really didn't go there on Sunday. In part because the creation narrative conversation gets bogged down into questions like, well, is Moses, I'm assuming that Moses is the primary author of the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Was Moses describing 6 24-hour days as we know them? Sun and moon weren't referenced until a little bit later in there. Is that an issue? How does that get argued in? Is this creation account real history? Or many have suggested it should be in the category of myth. More recently, some scholars have described it as real myth. So these are places that you could go in your small group that I did not go on Sunday. And the questions like, are Adam and Eve real human beings? And these are important questions. But again, they kind of take a back seat to where I'm trying to go with this series, because it's really this primary piece, which is God is creator. We are created. And sin has corrupted the world in which we live. And this is the explanation for so much of what we experience in our lives, but it's also an explanation for how we encounter the volume of Scripture as we move through the thread of this story. And that's the thread we're going to chase down. It's the thread of the gospel present in the opening pages of the Old Testament that ties it all together through the biblical narratives, through the poetry books, through the prophets, into the Gospels, where Jesus is revealed to us as the object of that thread of the gospel hope, the good news hope, and then through the epistles and how do we live this out as followers of Jesus, and then to our eternal hope, which I think is a reasonable thing to describe as the book of Revelation. We have this eternal hope, a present hope, and an eternal hope. So that's where the series is going, and I'm excited by it. I'm excited. In this case, I'm going to try to give you a person to help hang your hat on. I think I did a poor job of that this Sunday. Adam and Eve are it. I touched on that. So much to cover. We'll see how I do. Okay, you're welcome to coach me. What's helpful to you as a small group leader? And then, as far as the questions are concerned, on the back of the sermon notes, I'm inviting you to compare the 4 major Old Testament creation accounts. What do you see there? I invite you to ask questions about, what does it mean for Jesus to have been present at the beginning? I'm referencing John chapter 1. I would encourage you, if you're doing this as a family or as a small group, pass the passages around and read those passages. Invite somebody to read the Genesis chapter 1 account. Invite somebody to read the John chapter 1 account and compare those passages. And then we get to Genesis chapter 3, and on Sunday I described that as the saddest, most distressing passage in all of Scripture. And there are some really disturbing passages of Scripture as you read through the pages of Scripture. But I would argue that this is the most disturbing, and we ought to feel the weight of it, because all the crap that comes after is a result of this. It's a result of sin and the violation of of a responsiveness to God, an agreement with God, that all of the other pain and agony of life then and now results. So these would be some places to go in your conversation. And then I've touched on something that is a point of significant theological conversation in the realm of scholarly discussion around how are we to understand Adam's sin. And you will have heard me articulate a pretty traditional conservative approach that understands that Adam's sin has been imputed to us, is the technical term, and that he opened the door and we as Paul says, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Well, that's not just, I would argue, that's not just because of the errors I have made, the sin I have committed, but that I started at a disadvantage. I started with a sin record, which is that of humanity. That is a debated point, significantly more today than perhaps ever before. And some of it comes out of even some of these earlier questions that we discussed. Is Genesis 1 describing 6 24-hour days? That's called a young earth, a young earth position on the creation of the world. Is it describing epochs of time? That would be describing an old earth creation perspective. So young earth creationist, old earth creationist, or is it describing a window of time where evolution took process through that over billions of years, and you have an evolutionary creationist position. I find that one very difficult to square with the rest of Scripture, but I have good friends who would embrace that position. Young Earth creationism ends up pitting itself against science, such as we know it. I kind of prefer the old Earth creation position. Dr. Hugh Ross is an astrophysicist that I've followed for many years. I've been reading one of his books recently. I find his arguments very convincing, very scholarly, very scientific. He argues theology as a scientist, which is one of the things that I like. But Ken Ham argues for the young earth position. The thing I don't like about some of what Ken Ham does is that they argue that if you get this wrong, you're going to get all of Scripture wrong, and that worries me as a little bit too much of an either-or situation. The thing that I struggle with evolutionary creationism are some of the passages that I've given you from Paul as he describes the effects of sin, such as they came to us through Adam, and I think we have to reckon with that as scholars, as followers of Jesus. So that's maybe enough of an introduction. Maybe a couple more things here. I'm recording this obviously before I preach the sermon, but I will commonly refer to it, the sermon, in past tense, believing that the majority of people might actually come across this video after the Sunday sermon. And I'm seeing this as supplemental to Sunday, but some of you as small group leaders may want to be getting a bit of a heads up, and I will try to consistently have this available for you by end of day on Thursday. Likewise, the sermon notes, have them available to you by end of day on Thursday, so that you get a bit of an idea of where we're going on Sunday, and it might inform even how you hear the message on a Sunday morning. The other thing I would add is that I will, when we have guest speakers, or we've got a Life Sunday, something that is out of the current preaching series, I will still provide this and invite you to reflect on the events of whatever that was, whatever the guest speaker was, in what's hopefully helpful ways. The other thing I have found over the years is that inevitably groups fall behind. It's like, oh, we missed that one. We should go back and talk about that passage. That sermon from 3 weeks ago. We didn't meet as a small group. We didn't discuss it, but there was a bunch of things we could have discussed. We can go back and pick one up. The other thing would be that if you're meeting every second week or something like that, well, you're going to have scads of material that you can just pick and choose from. One of the realities being, if one of those questions was to spark really good conversation for your small group, man, who can ask for more than that? I thank you. If you're a small group leader, I value small groups enormously. And I see you as an extension of the pastoral care that myself and our staff and the SLT here at DC are able to issue, kind of a first line of care for those who are in your group. But seek us out as backup. And then let me also say that there's no perfect way to do all of this. And so I would really welcome your feedback. This worked, that wasn't so helpful. And how can we just make a tool where we're journeying together as followers of Jesus in really helpful ways? So that's the 10-minute coach, which is now a 14-minute coach on this week. I'll try to keep them closer to 10 minutes in the future, but hopefully this is a helpful introduction to the tool, the tools, Sunday, September 8th, and a journey that we're on together as followers of Jesus. Thank you for your time, for your attention, for your leadership, for your ministry and your care, for your family, for your friends, for those that are around you in your small group. I'm Pastor Terry Lee. We are Dalhousie Church, and this has been the 15-Minute Coach. Bless you, and bye for now.